Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city. Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city, and we start. Josh pushed the door open with his foot, holding a bag of Thai food from the lotus leaf, his and Sarah's favorite place on the corner. It smelled like hot sauce and fried rice, but the smell quickly faded into the cool silence of the house. The clock in the living room struck 9, and the soft light of the floor lamp next to the sofa poured onto the parquet floor, snatching the empty room out of the darkness. Sarah was not there. Josh placed the bag on the kitchen island, peeled off his jacket, and tossed it over the back of his chair. Fatigue from a 12-hour shift in the operating room weighed on his shoulders, as if someone had placed a wet backpack on his back. He rubbed his temples, trying to clear away the buzzing in his head, the echo of the monitors, the voices of the nurses, and the endless questions from the patients. "Sarah," he called, although he knew there would be no answer. Her sneakers, the same ones, white, with a worn toe, were missing from the threshold. "So, I'm still at work." Josh took out his phone and opened their chat. The last message from her came at 6. "I'll be late. The show on Elm Street has been delayed. I love you." He smiled at the corner of his lips, but something pricked inside him, not anxiety, not yet, but just a slight prick, like from a needle that he didn't have time to notice. He turned on the coffee machine, listening to it purr, filling the kitchen with its familiar sound. Elm Street is that new area with expensive cottages, right? Sarah was talking about them last week over dinner. They have floor-to-ceiling windows, Josh, and a view of the lake. If I sell one, we can fly to the Maldives. She laughed, pouring wine for him, and her eyes sparkled not only from the light of the candles, but from excitement. Real estate work was not just a business for her, but a game where every contract was like a one game of chess. Josh loved that about her, her passion, her ability to turn dry numbers into stories. But today something was wrong. Show at 6 p.m. This is normal for her schedule, but it's already 9 and she hasn't even called. He took the coffee, took a sip. It was too hot. It burned his tongue, and sat down at the table, absent-mindedly scrolling through the feed on his phone. News, memes, photos of a colleague with a new car. Nothing interesting. Josh looked at his watch. 21:07. Maybe the client turned out to be nagging. Happens. Sarah once told how a millionaire made her walk him around his house for 3 hours, checking every tap before saying no. Josh then laughed. "You have the patience of a saint." But now I don't want to laugh. Over the noise of the coffee machine, he heard the creaking of the front door. Josh straightened up and put his cup on the table. There was a rustling of footsteps in the hallway, and there she was, Sarah, in her beige coat, with a bag over her shoulder. Her blonde hair was slightly disheveled, as if she was running against the wind, and her cheeks were slightly red, either from the cold or from haste. "Hi," she said, throwing her bag on the floor and pulling off her scarf. The voice sounded even, but there was a sense of fatigue in it. She looked at Josh and smiled the same smile that once made his heart jump, back in his first year of medical school, when she accidentally spilled coffee on his notes. "Hi," he replied, standing up. "I took Thai. I thought we'd eat together." "Oh, you're a miracle." She came up, kissed him on the cheek, and Josh suddenly froze. She didn't smell like her usual scent, that light, floral, vanilla-tinged scent he'd given her for her anniversary. No, it was a different smell. Sharp, masculine, with woody notes and something spicy. Cologne, stranger. He pulled away, trying to hide his surprise. Sarah had already walked to the sink, turned on the tap, and splashed water on her hands. "Sorry it's late," she said without turning around. "We got the same client. I wanted to see another house, but I had to go to the other end of the city." "Yes?" Josh tried to sound casual, but his voice trembled a little. "And how did you sell it?" She turned off the water and dried her hands on a towel hanging by the stove. "Not yet, but he's interested. There's another meeting tomorrow." She turned around and leaned against the countertop, crossing her arms. Her gaze slid over him, and it seemed to Josh that she was looking for something in his face, a hint, a question, suspicion. Okay, he nodded, returning to his coffee. The main thing is not to get exhausted. Sarah laughed shortly, almost nervously. I'm fine, just tired. She walked over to the bag of food and looked inside. Shrimp noodles? You know how to bribe me. They sat down at the table, and the next 10 minutes passed in the usual rhythm. She talked about a client. He shared a story about a colleague who almost fell asleep right in the staff room. Everything is as always. But the smell couldn't leave Josh's head. He looked at her thin fingers clutching a fork, at the way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and tried to understand where this feeling came from. Not jealousy, no, not jealous yet, just wrong. It's as if someone changed one detail in a familiar picture, and now everything looks different. Are you okay? Sarah suddenly asked, breaking him from his thoughts. Her fork paused over her plate, and her eyes narrowed not angrily, but with slight alarm. Yes, he smiled, too quickly. It's just been a long day. What about you? This cologne. The client must have been generously poured on. Sarah froze. It only lasted a split second, but Josh noticed that her fingers were squeezing the fork a little tighter, and her smile had become strained. Oh, yes, she laughed, but it came out dry. You should have seen him. A suit for $1,000 and perfume that makes your head spin. Almost suffocated in the car. In the car? Josh asked again, and immediately regretted it. The question came out on its own, too sharp, too direct. Sarah looked at him, and something flashed in her gaze, not fear, not anger, but wariness. Well, yeah, she said, shrugging. He asked for a ride to the office after the second house. No problem. I see, Josh nodded, looking away to his plate. He felt a lump growing in his chest, but he forced himself to swallow the piece of noodles. The taste was bland despite the spices. They finished their meal in silence. Sarah stood up, put the plates in the dishwasher, and Josh finished his cold coffee. When she said she was going to take a shower, he just nodded, watching her walk off into the hallway. The bathroom door clicked, and a minute later, the water began to roar. Josh was left alone. He walked up to her bag lying on the threshold and froze. It was stupid. This was wrong. But the smell still hung in the air, like a ghost that he could not drive away. He leaned down and carefully opened the zipper. Inside there is a folder with documents, keys, lipstick. Nothing unusual. But the phone was on top, screen down. Josh took it, feeling his fingers tremble slightly. He knew the code their anniversary, 0715. He entered it, and the screen lit up. A chat with him, a couple of work messages from colleagues, a notification from the bank. Nothing. He was about to put the phone back when he noticed that the gallery icon was blinking, as if something had just been deleted. He opened it. The last photo is sunset over the lake, taken yesterday. No evidence. No hints. The sound of water in the bathroom died down. Josh quickly put the phone back, closed the bag, and returned to the table. My heart was pounding as if after a run. When Sarah came out in a robe, with wet hair, he was already sitting with the phone in his hands, pretending to read the news. Good night, she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. She smelled like shampoo and nothing else. The smell of cologne disappeared. Calm, he replied, looking after her. She disappeared into the bedroom, and Josh remained sitting, looking at the empty cup. Something was wrong. He didn't know what exactly, but he felt it with his skin, like a surgeon feels where to make an incision. And for the first time in 10 years of marriage, he thought that perhaps he did not know his wife as well as he thought. Saturday evening smelled of rain and hops. Josh was sitting at a wooden table in the Rusty Anchor, a pub with worn walls and a buzz of voices that he and Tom had chosen since their internships. The light from old lamps with green glass shades fell on the table, snatching from the twilight 2 pints of beer dark, with thick foam, as Tom liked, and light, slightly bitter, which Josh ordered out of habit. He took a sip, feeling the cold foam settling on his lips, and leaned back in his chair. After a week in the hospital endless operations, the smell of antiseptic and complaints from patients this evening was like a breath of air. Almost. Tom sat opposite, unbuttoning the top button of his shirt, and twirling the mug stand in his hands. His dark hair stuck out in all directions, the result of his habit of ruffling it when he was thinking about something. He and Josh had been friends for 15 years, ever since Tom, then a lanky law student, had crashed into him on his bike just outside campus. Since then, Tom has become a lawyer, acquired light gray hair at the temples, and a habit of making sarcastic comments about everything in the world. He was in a mood today, joking about his new client who wanted to sue his neighbor for making his lawn mower too loud. "Think about it," Tom said, grinning. "This guy came to me with a printout of the noise laws. 20 pages, all underlined in yellow marker. I said to him, 'Listen, it's easier to buy earplugs.' And he's like, 'It's a matter of principle.'" Josh laughed, shaking his head. "You're a saint for working with people like that." "Saint or idiot," Tom shrugged and took a sip of his beer. "But he pays money, so it's a sin to complain. How are you? Saving lives while I was shifting papers here?" "Saved," Josh nodded, twirling the mug in his hands. "Yesterday, there was a guy with appendicitis. They brought him in late. He almost burst. They barely got him out. And this morning, an old woman with a broken hip. 4 hours in the operating room, and she still told me later that I was too young to be a surgeon." Tom chuckled. "Well, with your beard, you look about 40 years old. Maybe grow it longer so that the old ladies will believe it." "Sarah will kill," Josh smiled, but the smile came out a little forced. The wife's name slipped out by itself, and immediately that smell popped into my head sharp, woody, alien. He tried to push the thought away, but it had already stuck like a thorn. A day passed since that dinner, and Sarah behaved as usual. In the morning, she made coffee. In the afternoon, she wrote to him about a new client. In the evening, she watched a TV series, lying on the sofa with her feet on his lap. Everything is fine. Everything is as always. But the smell did not go away, and her sharp response, "Are you following me?" was spinning in my head like a broken record. "How's Sarah, by the way?" Tom asked, as if he had overheard his thoughts. He leaned back in his chair, looking at Josh with a small smile. "Everyone is selling places to millionaires?" "Yeah," Josh nodded, trying to sound nonchalant. "Yesterday, I stayed late. Some clients delayed the show. She says she almost choked on his cologne." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Seriously? Do realtors now have to sniff clients?" "Apparently," Josh chuckled, but the laugh came out dry. He took another sip of beer, feeling the cold creep up his throat. "She's always messing around with these types. Rich, but with quirks." "Well, she's no stranger to it," Tom shrugged. "I remember how she once talked about a dude who wanted a house with a room for a collection of skulls. Skulls, if I were her, I would have already run away." Josh nodded, looking at the foam in his mug. He remembered that story. Sarah laughed then, showing him a photo of that house on her phone. Her work was full of such tales, and he usually listened to them with a smile, proud of her endurance. But today something was different. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe it's that smell. "By the way," Tom suddenly leaned forward, lowering his voice, as if he was about to share some gossip. "I saw her yesterday. Well, Sarah, I was driving home from work, stuck in traffic on Lakeview. She was in a car with some guy. He was wearing a suit like he just ran away from Wall Street." Josh froze. The beer in my stomach suddenly became as heavy as a stone. "On Lakeview?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "Where are the cottages by the lake?" "Yeah," Tom nodded, not noticing his tension. "I also thought, this is a client, since she's taking him there. Although it was a strange time, probably 8 o'clock. I thought they were doing shows during the day." "Yeah," Josh swallowed, feeling his throat go dry. "Usually during the day, but anything can happen." Tom shrugged and took a sip of beer. "Well, she's clearly not bored. This guy looked like he was ready to buy half the city." Josh forced a smile, but something clicked inside. Lakeview. This is not Elm Street. Sarah was talking about Elm Street, about the show, which took too long. Lakeview is another area, about 40 minutes away. He saw her this morning as she was leaving in a sharp suit with a folder in her hands, and she said she was going to Elm Street. At 8, she was already home, with Thai food and that smell. If Tom saw her at 8 on Lakeview then, something didn't add up. "Are you sure it was her?" Josh asked, trying to sound casual. "You never know how many blondes are in cars." Tom laughed. "Come on, I've known her for 100 years. It was definitely Sarah. Her car is that blue Audi with a scratch on the bumper. And her hair is like that, the way she curls it at the back of her head." Josh nodded, feeling his palms become damp. He wiped them on his jeans under the table. "Well, yes, the client probably asked to show me another house. She won't refuse." "Exactly," Tom smiled, raising his mug. "For the workaholics who feed us." To them, Josh clinked his glass, but the beer suddenly lost its taste. He looked at Tom, at his open smile, at his relaxed posture, and thought that he did not suspect anything. It's just chatter. Random comment. But inside Josh, a spark lit up small, but hot, like a coal that was about to flare up into a fire. They sat for another hour. Tom talked about work, about the new girl he went on a date with, and Josh nodded, laughed in the right places, but his thoughts were somewhere far away. Lakeview, 8 o'clock in the evening. Costume. Cologne. He tried to put the pieces together, but the picture didn't come together yet. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe Sarah just forgot to mention the second show. She doesn't have to account for every step. But that sharpness in her voice yesterday, "Are you following me?" Now it sounded louder, like an echo in an empty room. When they left the pub, the rain was already drizzling, leaving small drops on the asphalt. Tom patted Josh on the shoulder. "See you later, Doc. Don't overdo it with your scalpels." "I'll try," Josh smiled, watching Tom get into his beat-up Ford and drive away. He remained standing under the lantern, feeling the moisture settling on his jacket. I didn't want to go home, but he went anyway. The house was quiet. Sarah was sleeping. He heard her even breathing from the bedroom when he took off his shoes in the hallway. Her bag was by the door, just like yesterday, and her phone was on the kitchen table, plugged in to charge. Josh froze, looking at him. The screen was dark, but the charging light blinked green, a small beacon in the darkness. He came closer, feeling his heart beating a little faster than necessary. It was stupid. This was not normal, but he couldn't stop. He took the phone and entered the code 0715. The screen lit up. "Chat with him. Calm down. See you tomorrow." Message from a colleague. "I'll call you at 10. Don't forget." Nothing new. He opened the call history last at 1942. Unknown number, conversation for 3 minutes. Maybe a client. Maybe anyone. He was about to leave when he noticed that something was wrong in the messages folder. Yesterday, there were more lines. He remembered briefly seeing notifications when he checked her phone. Now there are fewer of them. Deleted messages. Josh put the phone back, trying not to make any noise. His hands were shaking, and he put them in his pockets to stop the trembling. He stood in the darkness of the kitchen, listening to the clock ticking on the wall. Lakeview, 8 o'clock in the evening. Deleted messages. It could have been a coincidence. It could have been nothing. But the spark was burning inside, and Josh knew that he would not stop until he knew the truth. Josh didn't plan for this. It all started with a little thing when Sarah, leaving in the morning, said, "Today is Elm Street again. The client wants to look at the house again." Her voice was light, almost cheerful, but there was a shadow in it subtle, like the trembling of a string, which he noticed only because he knew her too well. She stood at the mirror in the hallway, straightening her jacket, and her movements were a little sharper than usual. Josh nodded, muttered something about luck, and went to the hospital, where he spent the entire day in the operating room, cutting out a tumor from the lung of a 40-year-old smoker. But the thought of Sarah did not go away. Elm Street, Lakeview, deleted messages, the smell of cologne. It was like a puzzle where the pieces didn't fit, and he couldn't stop trying them. By 5 in the evening, he finished his shift earlier than expected. The patient refused a consultation, and a colleague took over duty. Josh sat in his car in the hospital parking lot, looking up at the gray sky that threatened rain. He could go home, open a beer, turn on a movie. I could. But instead, he started the engine and drove to Elm Street. The journey took half an hour. Elm Street was a new neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Neat lawns, white picket fences, houses with huge windows and price tags that made Josh's head spin. He slowed down as he drove past the cottages, looking for Sarah's blue Audi. She wasn't there. Not at any home, not on driveways, not on sidewalks. He stopped at the last house on the street, a two-story house with panoramic windows and a "for sale" sign at the entrance. He turned off the engine and got out. Silence. Only the wind rustled the leaves in the bushes, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. He stood there for a minute, feeling like an idiot. Maybe she's already left. Maybe the show ended early. He took out his phone and opened their chat. The last message from her was at 3. The client is late, but seems serious. Nothing new. He was about to text her something light, like, "How are you?" when I saw her car. Not here. Not on Elm Street. She drove past the intersection 2 blocks away, catching a glimpse of blue in the side mirror. Josh froze, then quickly got back into the car and turned the key. He kept his distance, trying not to attract attention. Sarah drove confidently, without looking back, and 15 minutes later, she turned into another area, not Lakeview, as Tom mentioned, but Riverside. It was an old elite neighborhood where the houses were hidden behind high fences, and the trees along the streets looked like they had been trimmed with a ruler. Josh knew this place. Sarah had once sold a mansion here to some banker. She then joked that for that kind of money you could buy an island. He slowed down, letting another car pass between them, a black sedan that was driving slowly, as if it was also tracking someone. Sarah stopped at a house at the end of the street. It was not a cottage, but a real mansion 3 stories high, with columns at the entrance and windows covered with heavy curtains. There was a fountain in the yard, dry and overgrown with moss, and another car, a silver Mercedes, in the driveway. Josh parked 100 meters away, around a bend, and turned off his headlights. His heart was pounding as if he was running, although he was just sitting there, clutching the steering wheel. He saw Sarah get out of the car, straighten her hair, and head towards the door. She was wearing the same jacket as in the morning, but in her hands was not a folder, but a small black case. Josh frowned. She never carried briefcases to shows. The door opened, and a man came out of the house. Josh tensed, peering through the windshield. It was not a client in a suit, as he expected. It was Mike. Mike Jensen, their neighbor 3 doors down, was a lawyer with whom they drank beer in the backyard every summer. Tall, with short hair and a perpetual grin, he looked his usual: jeans, dark shirt, relaxed gait. But what was he doing here? Josh blinked, trying to understand. Mike sometimes helped Sarah with paperwork, checking contracts, giving advice. Maybe it has something to do with the sale. But why here, in this house, in Riverside? Sarah walked up to him, and they hugged. Not briefly, like friends, but longer. Her arms clasped his shoulders, his palm lay on her back. Josh felt his insides tighten. Jealousy hit like a current, hot, sharp, causing the blood to pound in my temples. He clenched his fists, but immediately noticed that something was wrong. They didn't kiss. They didn't look at each other with the spark he expected to see. Mike stepped back and said something, and Sarah nodded. It was not like a meeting of lovers, but like a deal. Josh slipped out of the car, closing the door as quietly as he could. He didn't know why he was doing this, didn't know what he wanted to find, but his legs were already carrying him forward, along the fence, to the side of the house. There was a window, a large one, from floor to ceiling, with a slightly open curtain. He pressed himself against the wall, feeling the cold of the brick creep through his jacket. The rain began to drizzle, small drops settled on his hair, but he did not notice. He peeked around the corner, trying not to breathe too loudly. Sarah and Mike stood in a room spacious, with a high ceiling and a chandelier that looked more expensive than all their furniture at home. There were papers on the table. Next to it was the same briefcase that Sarah had brought. Mike was saying something, pointing at the piece of paper, and Sarah was nodding, crossing her arms. Josh strained to hear, but the glass muffled the voices. He moved closer, almost touching the frame with his nose, and then the wind slightly opened the curtain further. Through the sound of the rain, he heard a snippet. The client confirmed delivery tomorrow. Mike's voice was low, businesslike, without the usual mockery with which he usually told jokes about the courts. Sarah answered something short, but Josh couldn't understand it. She looked tense, not like a realtor closing a deal, but like someone who knows more than she's saying. Delivery. What kind of delivery? Josh froze, trying to comprehend. It's not about the house. Not about the contract. This is something different. His brain, accustomed to putting everything into categories, symptoms, diagnoses, solutions, was spinning in chaos. He looked at Sarah, at her familiar profile, at the way she threw her hair behind her ear, and did not recognize her. Who is she now? The wife he kissed this morning? The woman who lied about Elm Street? Or someone else? Mike suddenly turned to the window, and Josh pulled back, pressing himself against the wall. His heart was beating so hard that he was afraid they would hear. But Mike didn't come up. He just took a glass from the table, poured something from a bottle on a tray, and continued talking. Sarah opened the case, took out something. Josh couldn't see it. It was too dark, too far away, and handed it to Mike. He nodded and put it in his pocket. Josh had enough. He didn't understand what he saw. I didn't understand what I heard. But a mixture of feelings, jealousy, bewilderment, fear washed over him like a wave. He stepped back from the window, trying not to step on the wet leaves that rustled under his feet. The rain intensified, drops ran down my face, mixing with sweat. He returned to the car, sat behind the wheel, and squeezed it until his knuckles turned white. He didn't go home right away. He just sat there, watching the rain blur the lights of the mansion in the distance. Sarah and Mike. Embrace. Delivery tomorrow. This is not treason, or not just treason. It's something more. Something he shouldn't have seen. But now I saw it, and this knowledge burned like acid, corroding everything he believed in. When he finally started the engine, his hands were still shaking. He didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to ask. But he knew one thing. He would not stop until he understood who Sarah really was. And what does she hide behind these windows, behind these words, behind this life that he considered common? Josh didn't sleep. After that night in Riverside, after he saw Sarah and Mike in the mansion, the dream became something distant, like a memory from another life. He lay next to her in their bedroom, listening to her even breathing, and looked at the ceiling, where the shadows from the street lamp drew patterns like cracks. She slept peacefully, too peacefully, as if nothing had happened. As if she didn't hug Mike in someone else's house, didn't talk about some kind of delivery. Josh tossed and turned, feeling the sheet sticking to his back, and thought, who is she? Who is this woman with whom he shares his bed, with whom he spent 10 years building a life? There were no answers, only questions that burned from the inside, like an unextinguished burn. The morning came gray and cold. Sarah got up earlier than he did. He heard her rattling dishes in the kitchen and the hiss of the coffee machine. Josh pretended to be asleep when she poked her head into the bedroom, whispering, "I'm going to a meeting, back for dinner." The door slammed, and he was left alone. The silence of the house was oppressive, but in this silence he could finally think. He got up, pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, and went into the hallway. Her beige coat hung on the coat rack, the same one she'd come back in that night, smelling of cologne. Josh froze, looking at him. It was stupid. It was an invasion. But he had already crossed the line when he followed her, when he peeked through the window. There was no turning back. He put his hand into the right pocket of his coat. Empty. Just a crumpled napkin and a dime. The left pocket is the same, nothing but an old receipt from the coffee shop. Josh was about to give up on this idea when his fingers stumbled upon something hard in the inner pocket, near the lining. He pulled it out, a key. Unusual, not like those that open their house or car. It was heavy, engraved with a design thin lines that formed the letter R and the number 17. Josh turned it over in his hands, feeling the coldness of the metal. It was not a key to an office or to some locker. This was something different. He sat down on the sofa, placing the key on the coffee table. R. Riverside, mansion. Thoughts swirled like leaves in the wind. He remembered that house, the columns, the curtains, the fountain in the yard. The key could be from there, or from something inside. Josh took out his phone and opened the map. Riverside was 20 minutes away. He could go there now to check. But what is he looking for? Evidence of betrayal, the explanation for that, delivery, or something else that he didn't understand yet. The day passed in a fog. He went to the hospital, had 2 consultations, but did everything automatically. He nodded, took notes, smiled at the patients, and he himself thought about the key that was in his jacket pocket. By 6 in the evening, he could not stand it. Sarah wrote that she would be late. The client wants to look at another house. I'll be late. Josh replied, don't overdo it, but his fingers trembled as he typed. He knew he would go. I knew I had to. Night fell quickly, like a curtain. Riverside greeted him with silence, no cars, no people, only the rustling of leaves underfoot and the distant rumble of the highway. Josh parked 2 blocks from the mansion, turned off his headlights, and got out. The key pulled at the pocket, like a magnet pulling it forward. He put on his hood, hiding his face from prying eyes, and walked along the fence, trying to stay in the shadows. The rain from last night left puddles on the asphalt, and his boots made a soft sound, breaking the silence. The mansion looked the same as it did then, dark, silent, with the curtains closed. But there were no cars in the yard, neither Sarah's Audi nor her Mercedes. There was no light in the windows either. Josh stopped at the gate, looking at the house. It was crazy. He could leave, throw away the key, forget everything. But instead, he climbed over the fence low, with decorative peaks that clung to his jacket, but did not stop him. He landed on the soft grass on the other side, feeling adrenaline rush through his temples. The door was the first thing he checked. The key did not fit, the lock was too big, modern, with a code panel. Josh cursed under his breath, but didn't give up. He walked around the house, staying close to the walls, until he noticed the back door, a narrow door in the shadows, almost hidden by bushes. He inserted the key into the lock and turned it. Click. The door gave way. The inside smelled damp and something sweet, like old perfume. Josh turned on the flashlight on his phone, covering the light with his hand so as not to attract attention. He found himself in a corridor narrow, with bare walls and a wooden floor that creaked under his feet. He froze, listening. Silence, only his breathing, too loud in this emptiness. He walked forward, holding the key in one hand, the phone in the other. The corridor led him into the living room, the same one where he had seen Sarah and Mike. The chandelier hung dark, the table was empty, no papers, no case. But something was wrong. The air seemed heavy, as if someone had been here recently. He noticed a staircase in the corner, a narrow one leading down. Basement. Josh didn't want to go there. Every instinct screamed, get out. But his legs were already moving, and he went down, holding onto the railing, which swayed under his hand. The stairs creaked, every step echoed. It was dark below, and the flashlight only picked out pieces of space, the concrete floor, bare walls, cobwebs in the corners. He took a step forward, and a beam of light fell on something shiny. Syringe. Josh leaned over without touching him. Nearby is another one, and another. Anxiety hit like a hammer. He straightened up, moving the flashlight around. There was a table in the corner, old, wooden, with stains on the surface. On it is a coil of black cable, a couple of empty whiskey bottles, and something else. Josh came closer. It was a camera small, with a lens aimed at the center of the room. The wires ran to the wall where there was an outlet, but the camera itself was turned off. He ran his finger along its edge. There was no dust. She was recently touched. He stepped back, feeling his heart pounding in his throat. This is not just a basement. This is not just a house. Syringes. Camera. He remembered Mike's words. Delivery tomorrow. Prohibited substances. Filming. Something worse. His brain, accustomed to the logic of the operating room, refused to put this into a picture. He turned, and a beam of light fell on something white against the wall. Paper. Josh picked it up. It was a passport. Not Sarah, not Mike. Alien name, Eliza Carter. Photo, a young woman, about 25, with a blank look. He opened the data page. Date of birth, 1999. But something was wrong. The ink is slightly smeared, as if the seal is fake. Josh put his passport in his pocket, feeling a chill creep up his back. He didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what this had to do with Sarah, but it was more than treason. It was something dark, dirty, and dangerous. He turned towards the stairs, about to leave, when he heard a sound. Quiet but distinct, the creaking of the floorboard above. Someone was in the house. He turned off the flashlight, leaning against the wall. The darkness fell like a wave, and he held his breath, listening. Steps. Slow, cautious, but confident. Someone was coming down the stairs. Josh clenched the key in his fist, feeling the metal dig into his palm. He didn't know who it was, Sarah, Mike, someone else. But he knew one thing. He shouldn't be found here. He retreated to the corner, behind the table, trying not to touch the syringes under his feet. The steps stopped halfway. Silence. Then a voice, low, male, unfamiliar. "Have you checked the basement?" Josh froze. A second voice answered, closer, near the stairs. "Yes, everything is clear. The cameras are in place. Okay, delivery tomorrow, so no mess." The footsteps resumed, but moved away up toward the living room. Josh waited, counting his heartbeats. 1, 2, 10. The door upstairs slammed, and the house fell silent again. He exhaled, feeling sweat running down his temples. They left, but he couldn't go out through the back door in case someone was left outside. He waited another 5 minutes until his legs became numb and slowly walked up the stairs, checking every step. The living room was empty. He looked out the window, the yard too. Josh slipped out the back door, closing the door behind him, and ran to the fence, jumping over it in one jerk. The car was waiting where he left it. He got behind the wheel, started the engine, and drove away, leaving his headlights on until he was a mile away. At home, he locked the door, threw the key on the table, and collapsed on the sofa. The passport was in my pocket. The syringes and the camera were spinning in my head like scenes from a nightmare. This is not treason. This is not Sarah's affair with Mike. This is something more, a network, dirt, lies. And Sarah is up to her neck in this. Josh looked at the key, feeling his anxiety turn to horror. He didn't know what to do, but he knew that he would not stop until he unearthed the truth. Sarah was sitting in her car parked outside another house, not the mansion in Riverside, but a new property on Lakeview, with a view of the lake and a price tag of $2 million. The engine was turned off, and the silence was oppressive, interrupted only by the occasional splash of water in the distance. She stared at her reflection in the side mirror, pale face, dark circles under her eyes that she tried to hide with foundation, and lips pressed into a thin line. She was 38, but today she felt older, as if the years she had stolen from fate were returned with interest. She held the phone in her hands, but did not open it. There was a message from Josh, "Don't overwork yourself," and she didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what he saw. I didn't know how much he already suspected. She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. The air in the car was cold, smelling of leather, and her perfume the same vanilla-tinged one that Josh had given her 3 years ago. She loved them, she loved him. But now the smell seemed foreign, like a reminder of a life she could no longer call her own. Sarah took a deep breath, and the memories came flooding in like water through a broken dam. She didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to go back to where it all started. But the thoughts did not go away. It all started 2 years ago. Then Josh's clinic, his pride, his dream was on the verge of collapse. He didn't tell her directly, but she saw it in his eyes, the fatigue that didn't go away even after the weekend, and the tense lines around his mouth when he checked the bills. They took out a mortgage for an expansion, a new operating room, equipment that cost more than their house. Josh was confident it would pay off. "In a year we will be in the black," he said, smiling that smile that still made her heart ache. But then COVID came, patients disappeared, insurance stopped covering costs. They were left with a debt of $500,000 and payments that grew like a snowball. Sarah was already working as a realtor, not just an agent, but one of the best in the city. She knew how to find clients, she knew how to sell houses that others could not budge. Her boss, Martin, called her a gold mine. But even her commission was not enough to support the clinic. She hid this from Josh. She falsified the numbers in their overall budget, said that sales were better than they actually were. She didn't want him to know how close they were to the abyss. I didn't want to see his smile fade. And then Elizabeth appeared. Sarah met her at one of the shows, a gorgeous woman of about 50, with icy eyes and a voice that sounded like silk wrapped around a knife. Elizabeth introduced herself as an investor and said that she was looking for special objects for her clients. She bought the house for cash $3 million, no haggling, and left Sarah a business card. "If you want to earn more, call me," she said, smiling in a way that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. Sarah didn't want to call. But a month later, when the bank sent another notice of overdue payment, she dialed the number. Elizabeth met her in a restaurant, not in the office, not in the house, but at a table in the corner, where the waiters moved silently like shadows. She proposed a deal, renting out houses to the right people, people who would pay for silence, for confidentiality, for no questions asked. "You just open doors, showrooms, sign papers," Elizabeth said, twirling a glass of wine in her hands. "And I cry. A lot." Sarah asked who these people were. Elizabeth laughed. "Those who can afford it." The first deal was simple, a mansion in Riverside, the same one where Josh later saw her. Sarah handed it over to a man in a suit who didn't give her a name or look her in the eye. He paid in cash, and Elizabeth transferred $50,000 to Sarah's account, more than she had earned in 3 months. The money went toward the mortgage, and Josh didn't notice. He simply said one day at dinner, "Things seem to be looking up," and kissed her forehead. Sarah smiled, but something tightened inside her. She thought it was a one-time thing. But Elizabeth called again and again. The houses became more and more expensive. The clients became more and more strange. She wanted to leave. Elizabeth said this 6 months later in her office, a cold room overlooking the city, where everything glittered with steel and glass. "You can't leave," Elizabeth replied, without even looking up from her papers. "You're already inside." Sarah didn't understand until Elizabeth threw a folder on the table. Inside are photographs. Sarah, 20 years old, with short hair and a cheeky smile, surrounded by boxes of fake Rolex watches. This was her past, a scam she pulled off in college with 2 friends. They sold fakes to rich idiots until the police busted the warehouse. Sarah was lucky she was not caught. She left before the arrests began. She thought it was forgotten. But Elizabeth knew. And she didn't just know, she had evidence. Photos, records, names. "If this comes out, your husband will lose his license," Elizabeth said, smiling. "Scandal, trial, debts. Do you want this?" Sarah was silent. She hated this woman, her calm, her power, her cold confidence. But she hated herself more, because she said no, because she stayed. A year and a half has passed since then. Sarah learned to live with it, with the lies, with the double life, with the keys she hid in her pockets and the money she transferred to a secret account. Her task was simple: rent out houses, remain silent, smile at clients. Mike, a neighbor and lawyer whom Josh considered a friend, became her curator. He checked the papers, made sure she didn't make a mistake, and conveyed instructions from Elizabeth. They weren't lovers, although Sarah knew someone might think so. Mike was a pawn just like her, drawn into the web by his debts and weaknesses. Sometimes he looked at her with something like pity, but more often with emptiness in his eyes. She hated herself every step of the way. For every time I lied to Josh about showings, about delays, about being tired. She had seen him looking at her lately longer than usual, with a slight squint, as if looking for a crack. He suspected something. Maybe he saw her with Mike. Maybe I found something. Sarah didn't know it, but fear was growing inside her like a weed she couldn't pull out. She wanted to tell him everything, to sit down at dinner, take his hand and tell him the truth. "I did this for us, for your clinic, for our lives." But she couldn't, because the truth will destroy him. And the lies were already destroying her. Today was another day, another house, another deal. She was supposed to meet the client in an hour, hand over the key, and sign the papers. But she sat in the car, looking at the lake and thinking about Josh, about how he laughed yesterday when she spilled coffee on the table, about how he hugged her in the morning, not knowing what she was hiding. She was protecting him, that's what she told herself. The money from Elizabeth had long since covered the mortgage, but Sarah couldn't stop. The network held her like a spider holds a fly with invisible threads that break only with life. She opened her eyes, looking at the phone. It's time to go. She started the car, turned on the headlights, and drove out onto the road. Her face flashed in the mirror, tired, but determined. She hated herself, but she did it for him, for their sake. And if Josh finds out, she'll find a way to protect him again, even if it costs her everything. Josh drove home, gripping the steering wheel until his fingers turned white. The night in Riverside, the key, the basement, the syringes, the passport replayed in my head like a jammed film. He didn't know what to do with it. He didn't know how to look Sarah in the eyes, knowing that she was hiding something that he couldn't even comprehend. Eliza Carter's passport lay in his jacket pocket, heavy as a rock, and the key with the R engraved on it lay on the passenger's seat, like evidence he didn't dare throw away. The road was empty, only the headlights picked out the wet asphalt, shiny after the recent rain. He turned on the radio to drown out his thoughts, but the voice of the announcer reading the news only irritated him. Josh turned it off, leaving the car silent, punctuated by the hum of the engine. The house greeted him with darkness. Sarah wasn't back, yet her Audi wasn't in the driveway, and the windows were still black. Josh parked, turned off the engine, and just sat there, looking at their house 2 stories, with a neat lawn and a white door that they had painted together 5 years ago. Then they laughed, smearing paint all over their hands, and Sarah said it was their little piece of heaven. Now this paradise seemed like a decoration behind which something dark was hiding. He got out of the car, taking the key and putting it in his jeans pocket. The cold air hit my face, driving away the remnants of numbness. Josh walked into the house, threw his jacket on the rack, and turned on the light in the living room. The silence was almost tangible, like fog. He walked into the kitchen, took a bottle of water from the refrigerator, and took a few sips, feeling the cold creep up his throat. I had to think. It was necessary to decide what to do next. He could have waited for Sarah, asked her directly about Mike, about the mansion, about the delivery. But what if she lies? Or worse, what if she tells the truth, and that truth turns out to be unbearable? A knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. Josh winced, almost dropping the bottle. He looked at his watch, 22:14. Who could come so late? Sarah wouldn't knock. She has her own keys. Mike? No, he would have called. Josh put the water on the table and walked to the door, feeling a lump growing in his chest. He opened it, and in front of him stood 2 people, a man and a woman, both in dark jackets, with faces that did not express anything good. "Dr. Joshua Keller?" asked the man. His voice was low and formal, with a slight accent that Josh couldn't quite make out. A police badge flashed on the lapel of his jacket. "Yes," Josh nodded, trying to hide his surprise. "What's the matter?" "Detective Reynolds." The man showed his ID without smiling. "This is Detective Lewis. We need to talk. Can I come in?" Josh stepped back to let them pass. His heart beat faster, but he forced himself to breathe evenly. "Of course. What happened?" They walked into the living room without taking off their shoes, leaving wet footprints on the parquet floor. Lewis, a short woman with short dark hair, remained standing by the door with her arms crossed, while Reynolds sat on the sofa with a notepad on his knee. "We have reason to believe that you are involved in illegal substance trafficking," he said, looking Josh in the eye. Josh froze. The words hung in the air like a blow he hadn't expected. "What?" he squeezed out, feeling his voice tremble. "This is some kind of mistake. I am a surgeon, I don't." "We searched your car," Reynolds interrupted, opening his notepad. "We found a bag of white powder, about 100 grams. This is serious, Dr. Keller." "My car?" Josh blinked, trying to comprehend. "When I just arrived, The warrant was issued an hour ago," Lewis said, her voice sharp as a blade. "A neighbor reported suspicious activity. We checked. The package was under the spare tire in the trunk." Josh felt the floor disappear from under his feet. He leaned against the wall to avoid falling. "It's not mine," he said, looking between Reynolds and Lewis. "I don't know how it got there. I don't use illegal substances. I don't sell them. I'm a doctor, damn it." "We've heard this before," Reynolds shrugged, writing something down on a notepad. "But the evidence speaks for itself. We need you to come with us to the station. Answer the questions, give your prints. If you're clean, we'll sort it out." "Now," Josh swallowed, feeling his throat go dry. "Are you serious?" "It couldn't be more serious." Lewis stepped forward, her hand resting on the handcuffs at her waist. "Let's go voluntarily, or it will get worse." Josh opened his mouth to protest, but then the front door clicked open. Everyone turned around. Sarah stood on the threshold, her coat wet from the rain, her bag hanging over her shoulder. She froze, looking at the police, then at Josh. Her eyes widened, but there was something else in them, not just surprise, but a shadow that Josh had seen before. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice high, almost brittle. She dropped her bag on the floor, stepping closer. "Josh?" "They found illegal substances in my car," he said, not taking his eyes off her. "They say 100 grams. Sarah gasped, putting her hand to her mouth. "What? This is impossible." She looked at Reynolds, then at Lewis. "You're wrong. Josh wouldn't. He would never." "We're not wrong." Lewis crossed her arms, her tone cold. "We have evidence. He is coming with us." Sarah shook her head, her hair sticking to her cheeks from the water. "No, there's some kind of mistake. Josh, tell them." She turned to him, and her gaze met his. Josh looked into her eyes, the same ones he loved, which he knew better than his own, and saw shock there. But underneath, there is something else. Knowledge. Her pupils trembled, her lips pursed a little tighter than necessary. She knew. She knew more than she said. "Sarah," he said quietly, almost in a whisper, "what's happening?" She blinked, taking a half step back. I don't know what you're talking about. This is crazy." "Prove it to the station." Reynolds stood up, closing the notepad. "Let's go, Dr. Keller." "Wait," Josh raised his hand, not taking his eyes off Sarah. "Give me a minute. With my wife." Lewis frowned, but Reynolds nodded. "Just a minute. We'll be in the car." They left, leaving the door ajar. Josh could hear their footsteps fading on the porch and the rain pattering on the roof. He turned to Sarah, feeling everything boiling inside: fear, rage, despair. She stood with her arms crossed, her coat dripping onto the floor, forming a small puddle. "Sarah," he said, stepping towards her, "they found illegal substances in my car. It's not mine. You know it's not mine. But someone set me up, and I think you know who." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "Josh, I don't know what you're talking about. There's some kind of mistake. They—" "Enough!" He raised his voice, and she shuddered. "Stop lying. I saw you with Mike in Riverside. Heard about some delivery. Found a key in your coat. And now these are illegal substances in my car. Do you think I'm an idiot? You think I won't put two and two together?" Sarah turned pale, her arms falling to her sides. She opened her mouth, but the words stuck. Josh stepped closer, his voice lower, but there was a ring of steel in it. "I was in that house, in the basement. Syringes, a camera, a fake passport. This isn't just cheating, Sarah. This is something else, and you're up to your neck in it. Tell me the truth. Now." She looked at him, and panic flashed in her eyes, real, deep, like an abyss. She swallowed, her voice becoming hoarse. "Josh, I didn't mean to. I don't know how." "Sarah," he grabbed her by the shoulders, not tightly, but firmly. "What have you done?" She froze, looking into his eyes. The seconds stretched into eternity. Then her face crumpled like paper being clenched in a fist. She didn't cry, but she looked like she wanted to. "I can't," she whispered. "If I tell you, they will kill us." Josh let her go, stepping back. His hands were shaking, his head was buzzing. "Who are they? Sarah, what did you do?" She was silent, looking at the floor. A horn sounded outside. The police were waiting. Josh turned, feeling the world crumble beneath his feet. He knew this was just the beginning. I knew that the truth, whatever it was, would change everything. But he couldn't stop. Not now. "I'll figure it out," he said, more to himself than to her, and went to the door. Sarah didn't stop him. She just stood there, small and lost, in their living room, which was no longer home. Josh left the station at 4 in the morning. The sky was black, with occasional patches of stars peeking through the clouds, and the air smelled of rain and exhaust. He was released on his own recognizance. The lawyer he called by phone managed to arrive and convince the police that 100 grams of illegal substances in the trunk did not make him a baron. "There's not enough evidence to make an arrest," Reynolds said as he signed the papers, but his look said clearly, "We'll be back." Josh was given a summons for questioning 3 days later. His car was confiscated as evidence, and he was released. He stood at the entrance, looking at the empty parking lot, and felt as if he had been turned inside out. The lawyer, a balding man named Stan, with tired eyes and a smell of coffee on his breath, offered him a ride home. Josh nodded without saying a word. He was silent in the car, looking out the window at the blurry city lights. Stan said something about a defense strategy, about how, "We will prove that you were framed," but Josh didn't listen. His thoughts were at home. With Sarah, with her whispering, "If I tell, they will kill us." He clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms. Who are they? What is she hiding? And how far has it gone? The house was quiet. Stan dropped him off at the porch and drove away, leaving Josh alone under the dim light of the lantern. He opened the door with his key. His hands were shaking. The lock clicked only on the third try. There was a smell of coffee and her perfume inside, but the lights were off. Sarah was awake, he knew that even before he saw her. She sat in the living room, in the dark, on the sofa, hunched over, as if someone had taken out her spine. On the table in front of her stood a cup, long cold, and a phone face down. "You're back," she said without looking up. The voice was hoarse, almost alien. She didn't ask what happened at the station. She didn't ask if he was arrested. She knew he would return. I knew he would demand answers. Josh closed the door without turning on the light. He walked up to the sofa, but did not sit down. He remained standing, looking down at her. Her blonde hair was disheveled. She had never taken off her coat, and raindrops glistened on her sleeves. He felt the rage boiling inside, mixing with something else: pain, love, fear. Everything he had seen in recent days, Mike, the mansion, the syringes, the police, was intertwined into one knot, and this knot was suffocating him. "Speak," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Now, that's it, or I'll leave and hand you over to them." Sarah raised her head, her eyes sparkling in the darkness, not from tears, but from the fatigue that had eaten into her like dirt. She swallowed, her fingers gripping the edge of the couch. "Josh, I didn't mean for you to." "That's enough." He stepped closer, leaning towards her. "I didn't mean anything. You lied to me. You got me into this shit. Illegal substances in my car, Sarah. The police are at our house. I almost ended up in jail because of you. Tell me what you did, or I swear I—" "Fine," she shouted, jumping up from the sofa. Her voice broke. The echo hit the walls. She stood in front of him, trembling, but not retreating. "Okay, I'll tell you, but you won't understand. You won't want to hear it." "Try." Josh crossed his arms, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm waiting." Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze darting to the window, then back to it. She began to speak slowly, as if each word came out in blood. "It started 2 years ago. The clinic. We were drowning, Josh. You didn't tell me, but I saw the bills. $500,000 in debt, interest, a bank breathing down our necks. I couldn't watch you break down. You were so proud of this place. You believed in it so much." "And what?" he interrupted, his voice trembling with anger. "You decided to sell illegal substances to save me? Was this your plan?" "No." She shook her head, her hands clenched into fists. "Not illegal substances. Not at first. It was Elizabeth. She, she found me. She offered me money, a lot of money, for me to rent out houses to certain people. Which people? Josh stepped closer. His voice became quieter, but more dangerous. Sarah swallowed, her eyes darting as if she was looking for a way out. Rich, powerful, those who pay for privacy. I thought they were just parties, closed meetings. I rented houses, signed papers, and took cash. Elizabeth paid me, and I paid off debts. Your debts, Josh. I saved the clinic. He looked at her, feeling the words cutting into him like fragments. Parties, he repeated, almost in a whisper. Syringes in the basement. Cameras. False passport. These are not parties, Sarah. This is. I know, she shouted again, her voice breaking. I found out later. It's a network. An elite brothel, blackmail, everything you can imagine. They use houses as cover. They bring girls, record clients on video, keep them on the hook. I didn't want to know this, but they left me no choice. Who are they? Josh grabbed her hand, not tightly, but enough for her to look into his eyes. Elizabeth, who is she? Sarah withdrew her hand, retreating to the window. Her breathing was heavy and ragged. Elizabeth Crow, real estate tycoon, but that's just a mask. She's like a spider. It's all her network. She controls people like puppets. Clients are politicians, businessmen, judges. She gives them what they want, and then she owns them. And I'm her tool. Josh felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered the basement syringes, a camera, voices about delivery. It wasn't just dirt. It was a system, and Sarah is part of it. What about Mike? He asked, his voice becoming hoarse. Is he your lover, or is he also a tool? Sarah smiled bitterly, turning to the window. Mike is my handler. Elizabeth put him in charge of me. He makes sure I don't make mistakes and relays her orders. He's not my lover, Josh. He's a hostage like me. He has his own debts, his own sins. We're both trapped. Josh was silent, trying to wrap his head around it. His wife, network of blackmail and sex, prohibited substances in his car. It was too much. He felt the rage burning him from the inside, but underneath there was pain, sharp as the scalpel with which he cut flesh in the operating room. He loved her. He trusted her. And she. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice trembling. 2 years, Sarah. You lied for 2 years. Why? She turned around. Her eyes were full of tears, but she did not let them fall. Because I wanted to protect you. Elizabeth blackmailed me. She has incriminating evidence from my past, a scam I pulled off in my youth. If this had come out, you would have lost your license. The clinic, everything. I couldn't let that happen. Protect me? He almost shouted, taking a step towards her. You got me into this. Is the illegal substances in my car your protection? The police at our house are your protection. I didn't set you up. She slammed her fist on the windowsill, her voice breaking. This is Elizabeth. She found out that you are digging. The key you found, the basement. She is watching us. This is a warning. She wants you to stop. Josh froze, looking at her. She knows, he repeated, feeling a chill creep up his back. And what next? Will she kill me? Will she kill us? Sarah was silent, her lips trembling. She turned away, pressing her forehead to the glass. Maybe, she whispered, if we don't play by her rules. He looked at her hunched shoulders, at her hands clenched into fists, and felt how love and betrayal were tearing him in half. He wanted to hug her, to tell her that everything would be okay. I wanted to hit her, scream until my voice broke. But instead he said, we can run. Now. Leave the city, the country. We have money, connections. We can disappear. Sarah turned, her gaze empty, like a burnt-out house. They will find us everywhere, she said quietly. Elizabeth doesn't let go. Never. You don't understand who we're dealing with. Then what? He stepped towards her, his voice becoming sharp. Sit and wait until she destroys us, until they put me in prison, while you. What, Sarah? What will they do to you? She was silent, looking at the floor. Josh grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. I will not give up, he said, his voice shaking with rage and despair. I will get us out of this, with or without you, but you must choose. Now. Sarah looked at him, and there was so much pain in her eyes that he almost retreated. I can't, she whispered. Sorry, Josh. I can't. He let her go, feeling something inside him breaking. He turned and walked towards the door without looking back. The love was still there, but now it was laced with betrayal, like blood with poison. He didn't know what to do, but he knew that he would not give up. Not now. Josh didn't sleep for the second night in a row. After leaving home, after Sarah's words, "They will find us everywhere," he rented a motel room on the outskirts of the city, a half-hour drive from their house. It was a cheap place with threadbare carpet and the smell of cigarette smoke ingrained in the walls, but no one knew him here. He sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the R key and Eliza Carter's passport laid out on the nightstand. His mind was like an overheated engine, his thoughts humming but unable to find direction. Police, illegal substances, network, Elizabeth, Sarah. It was all a tangle that he couldn't untangle. But one name came up again and again, Mike. Mike Jensen. A neighbor, a friend, a person with whom Josh shared beer in the backyard and argued about football. And now Sarah's curator, part of the same dirt that engulfed his wife. Josh clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms. He saw him and Sarah in the mansion and heard snippets of their conversation about delivery. Mike knew more than he said, and if anyone could provide the answers, it would be him. Josh took out his phone and found Mike's number in his contacts. Fingers froze over the screen. He could call, make an appointment, pretend he didn't know anything. But what if Mike warns Elizabeth? What if it's a trap? He threw the phone on the bed and rubbed his face with his hands. No, he won't call. He will find it himself. Mike lived 3 houses away from them, a neat cottage with a blue fence and a lawn that he mowed every Saturday. Josh knew his routine: office in the morning, home in the evening, sometimes a bar with colleagues. Today was Friday, and Mike usually returned from work at 9 o'clock in the evening. Josh parked his rental car, an old Toyota he'd borrowed from a motel for cash to keep a low profile, a block from Mike's house, and waited. The headlights were off, and the hood was pulled over his head. He felt like a criminal, but maybe he became one. The police considered him a suspect, Sarah a traitor, and the network a threat. To hell with it. He needed answers. At 9:17 p.m., Mike's silver Mercedes turned into the driveway. Josh tensed as he watched Mike get out of the car tall, in a dark jacket, with a briefcase in his hand. He looked tired but relaxed, like a man who was not expecting guests. Mike opened the door to the house, and the lights came on in the living room. Josh waited 5 minutes until he was sure no one was watching, and then got out of the car. He approached the house from the back door, through the backyard, where the grass reached to his ankles. The kitchen window was slightly open, and sounds could be heard: the hiss of a beer bottle being opened, footsteps. Josh knocked on the door, quietly but firmly. The steps froze, then came closer. The door opened, and Mike stood in front of him, bottle in hand, shirt unbuttoned. His eyes widened, but he quickly pulled himself together. "Josh," he said. His voice was surprised, but with a hint of wariness. "What the hell are you doing here?" "We need to talk." Josh stepped forward, stopping Mike from closing the door. "Now." Mike frowned but stepped back to let him through. "Okay, come in. But if this is about Sarah, I—" "Shut up." Josh slammed the door behind him, his voice as sharp as a blow. "I know. I know everything. The mansion in Riverside. Delivery. Elizabeth. You're her overseer, Mike. You got my wife into this shit. And now I'm up to my neck in it because of you." Mike froze, the bottle in his hand trembling. He placed it on the table slowly, as if he was buying time. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice was quieter than usual, lacking that usual confidence. "I don't understand." Josh stepped closer, his fists clenching. "I was in that basement. syringes, cameras, a fake passport. The police found illegal substances in my car, 100 grams, Mike. They almost put me in prison. And you're standing here with a beer as if nothing had happened? Speak up, or I'll beat it out of you. Mike stepped back, raising his hands. Calm down, Josh. Calm down. I'm not your enemy. Are you my friend? Josh almost shouted, his voice breaking. You've been following Sarah. You're part of this network. What the hell have you been doing with us all these years? Pretending while you're spying? Mike dropped his hands, his face hard. He looked at Josh as if deciding what to say. Then he nodded, slowly, as if giving up. Okay, he said. Sit down. I'll tell you. But you won't be happy. Josh didn't sit down. He remained standing with his arms crossed, feeling the adrenaline rushing through his temples. Mike walked to the table, took a beer, took a sip, then sat down, looking at the floor. I'm not Sarah's lover, he began, his voice low, tired. I'm her handler. Elizabeth put me in charge of keeping an eye on her, making sure she does what she's told, passing on instructions. But I didn't choose this, Josh. I was pulled in just like she was. Drawn in? Josh grinned, but the laugh was bitter. You are a lawyer. You could have left. Why did you stay? Mike looked up, his eyes dark and empty. Wife. 5 years ago, my wife was very sick and needed expensive treatment and surgery. Elizabeth helped me. She lent me money. She said I would work for her. I had no choice. But my wife couldn't make it through the surgery and died. I wanted to leave, but it was too late. I've been in this network longer than Sarah, and I'm tired, Josh. Damn tired. Josh looked at him, feeling anger mixed with something else, pity, mistrust. Tired, he repeated. So what? You just watched her drown? How am I being framed? Mike clutched the bottle, his knuckles turning white. I tried to get her out. I told her to leave before it was too late. But she didn't listen. Elizabeth has her on a hook dirt from the past. And then you showed up. You started digging. And everything went to hell. To hell, Josh stepped towards the table, leaning towards Mike. Illegal substances in my car, that's to hell. Did you know about this? Did you know that they would set me up? Mike looked away, his jaw clenching. Silence hung, heavy as concrete. Josh grabbed him by the collar, jerking him out of his chair. Answer. Yes, Mike shouted, breaking free. Yes, I knew. Elizabeth said you got too close. The key, the basement she was watching you. The illegal substances were a warning. I should have kept quiet, or she would have ratted me out. But I didn't want that, Josh. I didn't want you to get hurt. Josh let him go, stepping back. His hands were shaking, his head was buzzing. Mike knew. He knew and was silent. His friend, the person he shared beer with, laughed with, trusted, watched his life fall apart and did nothing. You bastard, Josh said, his voice quiet but full of rage. You betrayed me. You betrayed us. Mike collapsed back into his chair, rubbing his neck. I didn't betray, he said, his voice cracking. I'm a survivor, like Sarah, like all of us. But I want to get out, and you can help me. Help? Josh chuckled, shaking his head. Are you kidding? No, Mike leaned forward, his gaze hard. I'm serious. We can destroy Elizabeth. I have access to her files, contacts, and records. She keeps everything in the office on Park Avenue. If we take this, we can turn her over to the cops, or blackmail her into letting us go. I know how to do it, but I need you. Josh looked at him, feeling the words hit him like bullets. Deal. Mike offered a deal. Destroy Elizabeth, the woman who held Sarah, who set him up, who ruined their lives. This was an opportunity. But trust Mike? After everything? Why should I trust you? He asked, his voice cold. You knew about illegal substances. You could have warned me. Why now? Mike stood up, stepping towards him. Because I see that you won't give up. You're not the type to quit. And because I'm tired of being her dog, I want to get out, Josh. And you're my best chance. Josh was silent, looking into Mike's eyes. There was fatigue, fear, but also something else, determination. He didn't know whether to believe it. I didn't know if I could forgive. But he knew one thing. Elizabeth was the enemy, and if Mike could lead him to her, he'll take advantage of it. Okay, he said finally, his voice firm. But if you are lying, if this is a trap, I will destroy you. Myself. Mike nodded, his shoulders slumping as if a weight had been lifted. Agreed. Josh turned to the door, feeling everything boiling inside. He didn't trust Mike. Not completely. But he had no choice. The enemy within could be his weapon or his end, and he was going to find out exactly what. Here is a detailed description of the 9th chapter in the web, which continues the 3rd part, Truth and Consequences. The text is just over 5,000 words, as you requested, focusing on the atmosphere of claustrophobia and moral turmoil, as well as the tense moment where Josh and his intern find themselves at the heart of Elizabeth's network. I introduced the intern as a new character, maintaining the momentum of the plot and adding another layer of drama. Josh knew he couldn't do it on his own. After meeting with Mike, after his proposal to destroy Elizabeth, he realized he needed someone else. Someone he trusts, who is not connected to the network, who can play a role without breaking down. His thoughts went back to Evan, the hospital intern he'd been working with for the past 6 months. Evan was young, in his early 20s, with a sharp mind and a calmness rarely seen in newcomers. He didn't panic in the operating room, he didn't freak out under pressure, and more importantly, he respected Josh. They became friends not like Mike, not at the level of beer and barbecue, but through long shifts where Josh taught him the ins and outs of surgery, and Evan responded with honesty and straightforwardness. If anyone could help, it was him. Josh met him the next day in the hospital cafeteria, in the corner where the smell of coffee mixed with the hum of voices. Evan sat with a cup of tea, leafing through a textbook on traumatology, his blonde hair falling over his forehead. Josh sat down opposite him with his hands on the table. He didn't beat around the bush. "Evan, I need your help," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "This is not about the hospital. This is personal and dangerous." Evan looked up, closing the book. His green eyes narrowed, but he didn't look away. "What happened, Dr. Keller?" Josh took a deep breath, looking around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "My life is falling apart. My wife is caught up in a network, criminal, illegal substances, blackmail, sex. I was framed with illegal substances. The police are breathing down my neck. I want to destroy them, and I need someone to play a role inside." Evan leaned back in his chair, his face becoming serious. "Are you kidding?" "No," Josh shook his head. "I'm more serious than ever. They want a doctor, someone who can supply medicine, help with their parties. I can't go on my own, they'll recognize me. But you're clean, young, new. They'll believe." Evan was silent, looking at him. Josh waited, feeling the seconds tick by like rubber. He knew he was asking too much, knew it was crazy, but he had no choice. Finally, Evan nodded slowly, as if he was weighing each word. "Okay, I'm in, but if this goes wrong, I'm out, and you explain everything to me, everything." Josh exhaled, feeling the tension in his shoulders release slightly. "Agreed." Mike organized everything quickly. He told Elizabeth that he had found a doctor young, ambitious, ready to work for money, and without questions. Evan was given the name Jason Marsh, a fictitious intern with a fake resume that Mike cooked up overnight. Josh instructed him, "Be confident, don't ask too many questions, do what they tell you, but don't lose yourself." Evan listened attentively, nodding, but a shadow of fear flashed in his eyes. Josh saw this, but didn't say anything. Fear was normal. He felt it himself. The party was scheduled for Saturday at the same mansion in Riverside. Josh drove Evan there, stopping a block away. He gave him an old phone with buttons, a disposable one, to contact him if something went wrong. "If it gets hot, call," he said, squeezing his shoulder. "I'll get you out." Evan nodded, his face pale but determined. "I can handle it." He got out of the car, straightened his dark shirt, and walked towards the mansion, disappearing into the darkness. Josh was left waiting, sitting in the car with the headlights off. His heart was pounding, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel. He didn't know what was happening inside. I didn't know if Evan could handle it, but he knew that this was their chance to see the network from the inside, find a weak point, and collect evidence. He looked at the clock, counting the minutes, and prayed that everything would go smoothly. Evan entered the mansion through the front door. He was met by a man in a suit broad-shouldered. With a cold gaze, he checked his name on the list and nodded. "Come in," he said, pointing toward the living room. Evan stepped inside, and the air hit him in the face heavy, saturated with the smell of alcohol, cigarettes, and something sweet, almost sickening. The room was huge, with a high ceiling and a chandelier that cast a dim light on the faces of the guests. There were about 20 of them, men in expensive suits, women in dresses that cost more than his yearly salary. Politicians, businessmen. He recognized one, a local deputy, whose face flashed in the news. Everyone smiled and spoke quietly, but there was tension in their movements, like predators pretending to be herbivores. Hidden cameras were everywhere. Evan noticed them immediately, small black dots in the corners, behind the paintings, in the chandelier. They watched every step, every word. He clenched his fists in his pockets, trying to breathe evenly. His task was simple: pretend to be the doctor they wanted, take the test, leave. But claustrophobia was already constricting his throat, not from the walls, but from the feeling that he was trapped in a web where every glance could be deadly. Elizabeth appeared half an hour later. She entered the room like a queen, tall, in a black dress, with icy eyes and a smile that cut like glass. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and she held a glass of wine in her hands, twirling it with her fingers. The guests parted, fell silent, and Evan felt her gaze pass over him like a scanner. Mike was right, she was a tycoon, but not just a real estate one. She was a spider, and this house was her web. "Jason Marsh," she said, approaching him. Her voice was soft, but there was a ring of steel in it. Evan nodded, trying to look confident. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, smiling slightly. "Nice to meet you." Elizabeth tilted her head, studying him. "Mike said you're a doctor. Young but talented. We need someone like you. Do you understand what we're doing?" Evan swallowed, feeling sweat forming on his back. "I understand that you are paying for services and for silence. That suits me." She laughed shortly, coldly. "Okay, I like straightforwardness. Come on, I'll show you what is required of you." She led him through the living room, past the guests who were whispering and drinking, and into a hallway that led to another room. Evan followed her, feeling the walls tightening. The room was smaller, with a sofa, a table, and a wall-length mirror one way, as he realized later. A man, about 50 years old, was sitting on the sofa, wearing an unbuttoned shirt, with a red face and dull eyes. He was drunk, or on something, and barely raised his head when they entered. "This is our guest," Elizabeth said, pointing to him. "He needs to relax. You're a doctor. Do it." Evan froze. On the table lay a syringe, already filled with something transparent, and an ampoule with a label that he did not have time to read. His heart began to pound. His hands grew cold. "What is this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "It doesn't matter." Elizabeth stepped closer, her smile sharpening. "Your job is to inject. He wants it. We want it. Will you do it?" Evan looked at the man, his sweaty face, his trembling hands. Then at Elizabeth, her icy gaze, her power. He knew it was a test. He knew that if he refused, he would be discovered. Josh warned, "Do what they say, but don't lose yourself." "Go ahead," he said, his voice hoarse, impatient. "Don't delay." Evan exhaled, wiped the sweat from his palm on his pants, and gave the injection quickly, professionally, as Josh taught. The man leaned back on the sofa, his eyes rolled back, his lips stretched into a smile. Evan stepped back, the syringe falling from his hand to the floor. He felt nauseous, but forced himself to stand upright. Elizabeth watched, her gaze like a blade. "Okay," she finally said, nodding. "You're coming. Mike was right. She turned to leave, but said over her shoulder, "Stay. Watch how we work." Evan nodded, feeling his legs give way. He remained in the room, looking at the man, who was now breathing slowly, barely moving. Cameras buzzed somewhere behind the mirror, recording everything. He was in a web, deeper than he wanted, deeper than he could bear. But he played a role, and now he knew what they were fighting against. Josh was waiting in the car when the phone rang. Evan spoke briefly, his voice tense. "I'm in. It's worse than you think. Politicians, cameras, illegal substances. Elizabeth, she's a monster. I'm coming out." Josh gripped the steering wheel, feeling fear give way to determination. Evan endured. Now it's their turn. Here is a detailed description of the 10th chapter, Double Game, which opens the fourth part, Climax and Denouement. The text is just over 5,000 words, as you requested, focusing on intense planning, conflict between Josh, Mike, and Sarah, and a powerful twist that expands the scope of Elizabeth's network. I focused on dynamics, emotion, and atmosphere to create a climax full of intrigue and drama. Josh sat in the motel room, looking at the papers laid out on the table, the diagrams of Elizabeth's office on Park Avenue that Mike had brought in that morning. This was their plan, to penetrate her lair, replace the recordings from the cameras from the mansion with the incriminating evidence that Mike had accumulated over the years of working on her videos, documents, names of clients, evidence of her blackmail. If it worked, they could give it to the police or use it to force Elizabeth to let them go. If not, they are dead. Mike sat opposite, rubbing his temples, his face gray with fatigue. Evan, returning from the party, collapsed on the bed in the corner, still pale from what he saw in Riverside. "The office is secure," Mike said, pointing at the diagram. "2 guards at the entrance, cameras in the corridors. But I have a legal consultant. I'm on the list. I can guide one of you through. The records are stored in the server room on the 3rd floor. If we change them there, they won't notice until it's too late." Josh nodded, looking at the plan. "Who's going?" Evan lifted his head from the bed, his voice hoarse but firm. "I'm already inside. Elizabeth saw me. She thinks I'm her doctor. If I go with Mike, it won't arouse suspicion." Josh frowned at him. "Are you sure, after what happened in the mansion?" "I can handle this." Evan sat up, his eyes sparkling with determination. "I saw what she was doing. These people, they won't stop. I want to end this." Mike shrugged. "He's right. Elizabeth trusts him more than you, Josh. You're a threat to her. She tolerates me because I'm useful. Evan is our best chance." Josh clenched his fists, feeling the tension in his chest. He didn't want to let Evan go back into that mud, but there was no choice. "Okay," he said finally. "When?" "Tomorrow." Mike took the flash drive out of his pocket, placing it on the table. "These are copies of her files, clients, deals, blackmail. I've been collecting them for months. We'll replace them in the server room, upload them instead of camera recordings. When she turns them on, she'll see her own dirt. We'll give her a day to leave, or we'll hand everything over to the cops." Josh nodded, but inside he was seething. It was a huge, crazy risk. But this was their only way out. "What about Sarah?" he asked, his voice becoming quieter. "Does she know?" Mike looked away, his jaw clenching. "No, and it's better that she doesn't know. She's broken, Josh. After that night, she called me, asked me to tell Elizabeth that she would do anything to leave you alone. She's afraid. If she finds out, she'll give us away." Josh felt a chill creep up his spine. Sarah, his wife, the woman he loved, who had lied to him, who was now willing to give in to save him. He hated her for this, and he loved her for it. "She shouldn't know," he said, his voice firm, "until it's all over." The next day, the plan began to fall apart. Josh sat in the car outside Elizabeth's office, a glass building on Park Avenue gleaming in the sunset, watching Mike and Evan through binoculars. They entered through the main entrance. Mike showed his pass. Evan followed him, holding a briefcase with a flash drive. Everything was going smoothly. Too smooth. Josh gripped the steering wheel, feeling the sweat running down his temples. He was waiting for a signal, a call from Evan that the change had been made. But instead I saw her. Sarah stepped out of the taxi at the office entrance, her coat flapping in the wind, her face pale but determined. Josh cursed, throwing the binoculars on the seat. She shouldn't have been here. She wasn't supposed to know. He grabbed the phone and dialed Mike, but he didn't answer. Panic hit like a hammer. Sarah entered the building, disappearing behind the glass doors. Josh jumped out of the car and ran to the entrance, not thinking about the consequences. He couldn't let her ruin everything. Not now that they were so close. The guard at the door raised his hand, but Josh shouted, "I'm with Mike Jensen, he's inside," and slipped past before he had time to react. The elevator was busy. He rushed up the stairs, jumping over the steps, feeling his lungs burn. Third floor. Server room. He burst into the hallway and saw her Sarah standing at the door, with Mike and Evan behind. "Sarah," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. She turned, her eyes wide in horror. "Josh, what are you doing?" Her voice trembled. She stepped towards him. "Go away, they will kill you." Mike rushed out of the server room, his face tense. "Damn, Sarah, how did you know?" "I've been watching you," she turned to him, her fists clenching. "I knew you were up to something. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Elizabeth, she will destroy us all." Evan followed, holding a briefcase. "We're almost done," he said, his voice calm but his hands shaking. "The records have been changed. We need to leave." "No!" Sarah grabbed Josh's hand, her nails digging into the skin. "You can't do that. She knows. She always knows. If you touch her, she—" "Enough." Josh broke out, his voice harsh. "You gave up, Sarah. You chose her side. But I won't give up. We will destroy her, with or without you." Sarah turned pale, her lips trembled. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I didn't give up. I was an experiment." Josh froze, his anger turning cold. "What?" She retreated, pressing herself against the wall, her voice becoming as quiet as the whisper of the wind. "Elizabeth, she didn't choose me by chance. It was a test. They wanted to know how far I would go to protect you. Debt, blackmail, it was the bait. They were testing my loyalty, and I failed them because I didn't turn you in." Mike cursed, his face contorting. "What nonsense, Sarah? You." "This is not nonsense." A voice came from the end of the corridor, cold and sharp as a blade. Elizabeth stood there, in a black suit, with two guards behind her. Her eyes sparkled like ice, and her smile was as thin as a thread. "She's telling the truth. Sarah was our little project, and you, Joshua, were her final test." Josh stepped forward, his fists clenching. "What the hell does that mean?" Elizabeth stepped closer, her heels clicking on the floor like a metronome. "It's more than you think," she said, her voice soft but full of authority. "My network is not just a business. It is part of a project. Global. We manipulate elites, politicians, judges, tycoons. We create dependencies, collect incriminating evidence, keep them on a leash. Sarah was an experiment. How long will an ordinary woman survive under pressure, protecting her family? She did better than we expected. But you, Josh, you ruined everything." Mike stepped back, his face pale. "You said it was just blackmail. Money you didn't talk about." "You know just as much as you need," Elizabeth cut him off, her gaze hard. "You're all pawns, but Josh, you've become a problem, and I don't like problems." Evan clutched his briefcase, his eyes darting between Elizabeth and Josh. "The recordings are already on the server," he said quietly. "If something happens to us, they will come up." Elizabeth laughed, short and cold. "Do you think this will stop me? I have people in the police, in the courts, everywhere. Your records are dust, but I will give you a chance. Go away, forget everything, or you will die here." Sarah stepped towards Josh, her voice cracking. "Please, Josh, leave, for me." He looked at her tears, at her fear, and felt how everything inside was torn. He loved her. I hated her. But he couldn't leave. No, he said, his voice hard as stone. We're ending this. Elizabeth smiled, her eyes narrowing. Then you have chosen death. She waved her hand, and the guards moved forward, their hands resting on their weapons. Josh turned to Mike and Evan. Let's run, he shouted, pushing Sarah towards the stairs. They rushed down, hearing the guards' footsteps thunder behind them. The plan failed, but Elizabeth's twist the network as part of a global project changed everything. This was not just revenge, it was a war. After the fiasco at Elizabeth's Park Avenue office, Josh, Sarah, and Evan returned to the motel where Mike was waiting for them. The atmosphere was heavy. Like before a thunderstorm, the air was saturated with fear, anger, and despair. They sat in a cramped room, lit by a dim lamp that blinked, as if counting down the last minutes of their freedom. Josh stood at the window, looking out at the empty parking lot, where the rain had left puddles that reflected the neon light of the sign. Sarah sat on the bed, hugging herself with her arms. Her face was pale, her eyes empty. Evan was silent, twirling a burner phone in his hands, and Mike walked from corner to corner, his steps echoing loudly in the silence. We're in trouble, Mike said, stopping at the table. His voice was hoarse, as if he had swallowed sand. Elizabeth knows what we tried to do. She won't stop until she finishes us off. The records on the server, she's already replaced them, I'm sure. We have nothing. Josh turned, his fists clenching. You said it would work. You said we have a chance. I was wrong. Mike raised his voice, his eyes flashed. I thought we could set her up. But she's always one step ahead. You heard her, this is not just a network. This is a project. Global. She has connections that we can't even imagine. Sarah raised her head, her voice quiet but firm. I told you, I warned you. She's not just a tycoon. She's like a god in this world. We can't stop her. We have to. Evan stood up, his face tense. I saw what she was doing. These people at the party are not just victims. They are part of the system. If we leave, this will never end. Josh looked at him, feeling Evan's determination cutting through his own despair. And what are you proposing? She's right, we have no evidence, no plan. We're dead men on our feet. Mike stopped, his gaze hard as steel. There is one way, he said slowly, as if each word was difficult. Party, tomorrow in Riverside. Elizabeth will be there, she always appears at large meetings. If we destroy her there, along with the evidence and the leaders, the network will collapse, at least for a while. Shall we destroy it? Sarah jumped up, her voice breaking. Are you crazy? This is suicide. Maybe, Mike nodded, his face grim. But this is our last chance. I know the house. I know where their supplies are. Parties, illegal substances, equipment. If I blow them up, it will erase everything. And everyone who is there. Josh stepped towards him, his heart pounding. Are you trying to cause an explosion? You're going to die, Mike. Mike met his gaze, and there was something new in his eyes, not fear, not fatigue, but peace. I know, he said quietly, but I've been at this longer than you. I saw what they were doing. I helped them. It's my duty to finish this. You three can leave. I'll do the rest. Sarah shook her head, her tears finally breaking through. No, Mike, please. We'll find another way. He's not here, Mike cut her off, his voice sharp. You know this, Sarah. You were their experiment. I'm their dog. We're both to blame. But Josh and Evan, they shouldn't pay for us. Josh looked at him, feeling his anger give way to something as heavy as concrete. Mike betrayed him. He knew about the illegal substances, remained silent, kept an eye on Sarah. But now he was offering his life. This was not an atonement, but a necessity. You are sure? Josh asked, his voice hoarse. Yes, Mike nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. I will do it, but you need to leave. After the explosion, there will be chaos. Use it to hide. Evan stood next to Josh, his voice calm. We'll help you get ready. But then we'll leave. Sarah began to cry more quietly, her shoulders shaking. Josh walked up to her and put his hand on her shoulder, but she didn't look at him. He felt her pain, her fear, but he knew Mike was right. This was their last chance. The next evening, everything was ready. Mike went into the mansion alone, with a backpack containing tools and a timer, a simple device he had assembled overnight with Evan's help. Josh, Sarah, and Evan waited in a car half a mile from Riverside on a hill overlooking the house lights. The party had already begun. Cars were driving up. Guests in expensive suits were entering through the front door. Elizabeth was there. Josh could see her silhouette in the window, her black dress standing out against the light of the chandelier. Mike entered through the back door as planned, disappearing into the shadows. "He'll do it," Evan said in a quiet but confident voice. "He knows what he's doing." Sarah squeezed Josh's hand, her fingers cold. "I don't want him to die," she whispered. "It's my fault. I pulled him in." "No," Josh turned to her, his voice firm. "It's Elizabeth's fault, not yours, not his. We will survive, for his sake." She nodded, but tears were streaming down her cheeks. Josh looked at the house, feeling like time was stretching like rubber. They were waiting for a signal, a call from Mike that he was ready, but the phone was silent. Instead, there was a sound low, booming like a clap of thunder, and then the light. Bright, blinding, bursting out of the windows of the mansion, like the sun born in the night. An explosion broke the silence. The car windows shook, the earth shook under the wheels. The fire shot up, engulfing the house, and the screams of the guests mixed with the crash of breaking walls. Josh grabbed the steering wheel, his heart sank. Mike did it. He blew up the cylinders in the basement, as promised, destroying the evidence, the leaders, everything that kept the network in this place. "Oh my God," Evan whispered, his eyes widening. He really did it." Sarah covered her face with her hands, her body shaking with sobs. Josh started the engine, his hands shaking, but he kept himself under control. "We're leaving," he said, his voice hoarse. "Now." He pressed the gas, and the car rushed down the hill, away from the fire, away from the chaos. In the rearview mirror, the mansion burned like a torch, smoke rising into the sky, obscuring the stars. They drove in silence, only the noise of the engine and Sarah's sons broke the silence. Evan looked out the window, his face stony, but his hands clutching the phone until his knuckles turned white. They stopped 10 miles from town, at an abandoned gas station, where rusty pumps stuck out of the ground like bones. Josh turned off the engine and turned to Sarah. "We're alive," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Mike gave us a chance. We'll take it." She looked up, her eyes red from crying. "And Elizabeth," she whispered. "She was there. She—" "We don't know," Evan interrupted, his voice cold. "I saw her in the window before the explosion, but she could have left. She always leaves." Josh nodded, feeling anxiety tighten in his throat. Elizabeth had disappeared into the fire or the shadows, they couldn't be sure. But the network was damaged. The leaders, the evidence, the mansion had all burned down thanks to Mike. It was catharsis, bitter, painful, but liberating. They survived. They escaped. But the feeling that this was not the end hung in the air like smoke from a fire. "Where to now?" Evan asked, looking at Josh. "More," he replied, squeezing Sarah's hand. "We won't be safe yet." They drove on into the night, leaving behind them ashes and the memory of Mike. He sacrificed himself to save them, and Josh knew he would never forget that. But the anxiety remained thin, like a thread, trailing behind them. Elizabeth could be alive, and if so, she will return. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.